Welcome back to Twin Football. This is the YouTube channel that covers the Premier League and the NFL. But today we have a special guest, David, and he is coming to talk the game, the best rivalry in all of sports, Ohio State football versus Michigan. David, how are you doing?
So, first of all, I'm Michigan born and raised, still live here. My parents' first date was actually at a Michigan football game. So, I mean, that's pretty much as deep as you can go. Me
Yeah.
and all my siblings went there. My grandfather went there. Now, my dad grew up in Toledo, okay, but they were massive Michigan fans. So, it is ingrained like in my blood. So, of course, I'm
Through and
always
through.
excited for the game. Okay. Maybe this year a little bit less excited, but I think we'll get to that later.
Yes, we will. And so I'm glad you brought it up because, I was actually born in Toledo myself, and that is a good place to start because this game was first played in 1897 on the football field. But really, I think it can go all the way back to 1837 when Michigan was developed as a state, but even further back than that in 1787 with the Northwest Ordinance and kind of kicking off the war or the battle for Toledo and really starting that. So I'm a Toledo born and I've seen the disparity, but that war for Toledo has really must been what kicked off this rivalry.
It has to be. Michigan applies for statehood after Ohio. They don't get admitted because Ohio objects because of how they
Yeah.
drew the map and things like that, because everybody was fighting over Toledo, which seems weird nowadays. You grew up there. You can tell me.
Yeah, actually, I went to college, and one of my first roommates, he said, that, yeah, this all started for the war for Toledo. They battled over it, and Ohio lost, and that's because they kept Toledo.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
it's definitely a
Right.
mixed place for that.
Yeah. Weird war, though, because I think one person was injured in a stabbing. There were never any
Yeah.
shots fired. It wasn't really a war. But those ill feelings persist to this day for some
Oh
strange
yeah.
reason.
Yes, yeah, and you can see it split throughout that strip of Toledo. I think it was like
Right.
400 square miles, and even my family is half Michigan, half Ohio State that live there. You can see on the same street in the same household different supporters.
For sure.
At the end of it all, like you mentioned, Michigan became a state, and they took over the land that was going to be Wisconsin and turned out to have a bunch of riches for Michigan. So I think it worked out okay for
Right.
Michigan. And in
Yeah.
the end,
Good.
it's always better when we piss off Wisconsin, right? I think we both can agree it's always better to piss off
Yes, we can.
Wisconsin.
We can agree on
Yes.
that. Yes.
Um,
100%.
and so there, that kind of helps establish the political proximity, war between the two. We see that in all of the great rivalries. You need that location, that history to help build the fans' hatred for each other. There also is this respect that comes with the rivalry. We saw it a couple of times. For example, Tom Herman in the 1940 game gets a standing ovation from the Ohio State crowd at the shoe in a Michigan win. But there also was a respect between some coaches. So I was hoping that you could give us your Mount Rushmore of Michigan coaches.
Sure. Okay. Obviously, both programs are storied, played for years in the top four of overall winning percentages and national titles and Big Ten titles and everything else. So we both have our specific coaches. And Michigan's top four, in my opinion, at least, would be, I think one of the early ones has got to be Fielding Yost. I mean,
Oh,
it's
yes.
early and football was like really weird and brutal, but he's claiming 6 national titles. He won the first Rose Bowl, over an 80% winning percentage. At one point in time, he won 56 straight games. So, I mean, they named the ice arena, which Michigan's hockey team is actually also pretty good,
Yes. Sadly,
typically.
that is true. Yes.
So they named it after him. So that's number one.
So much domination over Ohio State to begin with, so I could totally
Yeah,
understand
it
him
was
getting in
early
there.
though. I mean, when I looked
Yeah,
back at all of this stuff, I was like, football was so weird and apparently super dangerous.
yeah.
Like way more
Fewer
than now.
helmets.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Or no helmets or something
no
else.
helmets. Yeah.
Then I think his disciple, soon after, Fritz Chrysler, also
Ooh,
deserves to be on that mountain. 79% of his games won. He only won one national title and one Big Ten title, which is odd when you win almost 80% of
that
your
many
games.
games. Yeah.
But still, and then he was athletic director for 27 years, and the basketball arena is named after him. So,
Another good sign when you get other
right.
buildings named after you that you made some sort of impact.
Third, you have to put Bo Schembechler up there.
Yes, of
Despite
course.
the blemish on his record is that he never won a national title. You
I
know,
it, I can't fathom that. I mean, that
right.
is insane that he
Well,
has
so his
never won
problem was
that.
is that they were great in the Big Ten. He coached for
Yeah.
21 seasons. He won 13 Big Ten titles. He, of course, had the classic 10-year period where he faced off against his mentor, Woody Hayes, at Ohio State,
Yeah.
which is an unbelievable 10-year period. Won
Hmm.
78.5% of his games. But the bowl game was always an issue for him. He won
Yeah.
very, very few bowl games. And this is like the time when just the Big Ten winner would go to the Rose Bowl and that's it. Like,
Hmm.
and it was polls and everything like that. So if you lose your last game, you leave a bad impression, so on and so forth.
10-year war also
Right.
is the focus. I remember the stories coming out about Woody Hayes versus Bo during that 10-year period about Bo is sent in these waitresses to take care of our players, and we must kick them out of the dining hall so that way they're not infiltrating the team. And Bo on the other
100%.
side getting the police call to go into an apartment building because there's Woody Hayes spies in the building. I mean, you can't
Oh,
even
yeah.
make this stuff up of how heated that was, and really put the emphasis on the game being the game, and that it was
Right.
the full focus, even though it was still only considered the regular season and only would help you win a Big Ten
Right.
championship. So
Right.
I could understand it, but yeah, it's a legacy hit for him. But I agree. I think definitely needs to be on the Mount Rushmore. So who you
But,
got fourth?
yeah.
Oh, go
So
ahead.
fourth, that was a tough call. I feel like it was a tough call between Lloyd Carr and Jim Harbaugh.
Ooh, yes.
I personally gave the nod to Jim Harbaugh. Only
Okay.
because, and now we coached fewer seasons, but they're 9 versus 13 seasons. They both had a national
Yes.
title. Now,
Yes.
Lloyd had like 6 Big Ten titles versus Harbaugh's 3. But the reason I
Yeah.
gave him the nod is because, unfortunately, Lloyd's like last half dozen years weren't so ceremonious. In
Yeah.
particular, his record against Ohio State was
Jim
1.
Tressel. I mean, that's
Now,
you can't blame the
granted,
guy for Jim Tressel.
right, I know. But if you're a great coach, you find a way to overcome. And also, I think that
Yeah.
the modern era is more difficult to be a coach in
Okay.
than it was back
Yes.
in the 90s and even
That.
2000s because nowadays you got NIL, transfer portal, you have to win extra games. Like to win a Big 10 title, you have to win one
Yeah.
extra game at least, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
then to win a national title, you have to win one extra game because
Yeah.
if you win a national title before, you have to win your bowl game, but now you got to win two.
Two. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why I gave him the nod. I didn't love the NFL flirtations, and I certainly
Yes,
don't
I
love
know.
this.
He could have been gone 5 years ago, and he just had a losing record and everything, and nothing. He could have just went off to the NFL and never had a winning streak against Ohio State. Never had the
Yeah, but I
national
would.
championship.
No, you're right. You're right. But at that time, though, he wasn't really getting NFL offers.
True.
If you
True.
remember, they
Yeah.
started
True.
early in the Michigan career because he transformed a team that he had taken over that was not very good, and then made them good.
Fair.
And then there was this lull. And in his first 6 years, Jim Harbaugh didn't really have a winning problem. He had an Ohio State problem.
Yes. Yeah. That is true.
Because he
Ten
won a ton of the
10-win
other games,
seasons. Yeah. Right.
several times, and there are a couple times at least it came down to that game, and they lost.
Do you know about this Buckeye nut smashing in the graveyard that Jim Harbaugh used to do? He used to go down to the graveyard of Bo Schembechler and he'd smash a Buckeye nut. He even got his quarterback to do it a couple times.
So I think
Is
I
that,
remember actually reading about this. I
yeah.
don't think it's an actual tradition. Okay,
Oh, okay. Good.
I think that this was started because, again, we will probably talk about the game of the century, but
Oh, yes.
Bo passed away like 2 or 3 days before the game of the century. I mean,
Yeah.
that season for Michigan, it would be a movie. The only problem is
Yeah.
the ending. But regardless, so I
Yeah.
wonder if they started going to his grave, knowing that the anniversary of his passing is near the Ohio State game. I don't think
Ah,
that
I see.
it's not an overarching Michigan tradition that I had ever
Tradition.
heard of.
I see. Okay.
Okay. And he
Yeah.
passed away almost 20 years ago now, 18 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's long enough
2006,
for
right?
something to be a
Yeah.
tradition. But I don't think it was ever a tradition before. I think it might have been a Jim Harbaugh created thing, which he did a lot of those. So
Yes, yeah. That's interesting. So I will give my four Ohio State coaches, my
Please.
Mount Rushmore of Ohio State coaches
Yeah.
here in a second. But you gave me some interesting things to think about. I didn't think about when I was putting my list together. I totally agree with you with the NIL and now the transfer portal and everything. Not only are you recruiting new players, you're recruiting to keep your players. Where
Right.
coaches back in the day had, players that were playing for them all 4 years.
Right.
You're able to give that hard nosed coaching style Woody Hayes liked to give and Bo liked to give, to be able to really work on these players and grow them into good seniors. And Ryan Day comes into the question here. Is he done enough yet? He has currently a Michigan problem, as Jim Harbaugh did. So if he can turn that corner, maybe he could get up there in the rankings. But for me, you have to have Woody Hayes. Definitely. You mentioned him, the 10-year war,
Hmm.
that period for Michigan Ohio State was great. And the reason why was because of Woody Hayes, who also mentored Bo there. We have our football facility named after Woody Hayes. And the collegiate best coach of the year trophy is called the Woody Hayes Trophy. So that right there gets you permanent spot on the Mount Rushmore, if not the collegiate Mount Rushmore. He did finish 16, 11, and 1 against Michigan, so not the best performance against Michigan. That would go to Urban Meyer, 7-0 against Michigan, an undefeated season as well, even though we were ineligible for any bowl games. So I'm going to put Urban Meyer up there. I was at school during the national championship under Urban Meyer, so I definitely have a soft spot for that. I can remember everyone rushing the oval and just celebrating throughout the night with that national championship. It is forever ingrained in my heart, and 7-0 against Michigan is obviously something to hold highly in
Literally
this. And
perfect. Perfect.
yeah, perfect. And that contributed to the best winning percentage of any Ohio State coach at 90% of his games.
Yeah.
Shame that he only won one national championship, to be honest with you, over those 7 years with that type of winning percentage. It just falling
Well,
short a
I
little
think
bit in the
eventually you
bowl
have an
games.
Alabama problem
Yes, doesn't everybody?
in this era.
Doesn't everybody? That really was it in Clemson. Those tough games
Hmm.
against Clemson
Yep.
as well. Next on the list has to be the man of the sweater vest, Jim Tressel, 9-1 against Michigan. I'm going to count his wrongly vacated win. I'm going to count that one to make him 9-1 against Michigan. He's really a man of Ohio. Ended up being the president of Youngstown a couple years later after coaching that football team, and he was just represented Ohio State. That speech he gave at the basketball game on the first day he was hired, and saying how in 311 days you will be proud of our young men up in Ann Arbor, and then going out and getting that win as well.
Right.
Just automatically put him in the hearts of Buckeye fans. And so I
He
have to put him up there.
he did something that I'll have to admit was impressive because
Uh,
one of the elements of rivalries too is like competition for shared resources. Okay.
right? Oh,
Ohio is a much bigger state than Michigan is. You guys have three big cities that all start with C, oddly.
yes.
But Michigan is not
Exactly.
really some prized recruiting ground for football, but Ohio is. So
Yeah.
after Michigan, Michigan's recruits, the second most common state, and it was very close in numbers, was always Ohio during the
Ah,
90s and the 80s and everything like that. And Jim Tressel like came in and ended it. Like
yes.
out of nowhere. Like there was like a wall all of a sudden,
It
and
was
Michigan
beautiful.
couldn't get any. Michigan couldn't get. I know like Shiano is trying to do the same thing in New Jersey because New Jersey has a lot of people and a lot of good recruits.
Yeah.
But
His
Rutgers doesn't
problem is
really
he
carry the
coaches
name as Ohio
Rutgers.
State.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm like Jim
Yeah.
Tressel was amazing at just like, hey,
Yes.
we're keeping all the in-state talent to
Yes.
where later on, like Charles Woodson is from Ohio.
Yes,
You
exactly.
know,
Desmond Howard from Ohio. I mean, you're
right?
giving you Heisman Trophy
Right.
winners over there.
Exactly. But later on, the next one that was from Ohio that I remember that was of note was Jake Butt. And that was like
Ah,
in 2016. And it's like
still a
15
great
years
player.
past. And no, great
Yeah.
player. But I'm like
Yeah.
15 years past, and we didn't really have a great player from Ohio. So he
Yeah.
did amazing at locking down the in state talent and everything like that. And his brand of football won a lot of games, a lot of close
Yes.
games. I'm sure it was not good for the Ohio State faithfuls. Blood pressure.
That was such a big thing and really is still a big thing, especially you mentioned recruiting and stuff like that, you need to be able to show the talent that is in the state of Ohio, that Ohio State is the team and not Michigan. And that rivalry game every year always seems to help sway a couple people who are in
For
between the
sure.
two. They have family members that either went to one or the other. Only 200 miles separate the two. So if
Right.
you're a local kid, you're going to consider just which is the best opportunity. And the talent from Ohio, I think it has to rival Texas and Florida for the best talent in the country when it comes to football players. And
Yeah,
so you got
probably.
to lock it down.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't
right?
disagree.
Yeah,
Yep. Yeah, got to lock it down. If it's your state,
yeah,
you have to
yes.
take advantage.
Yes, and it goes back to the Toledo War. Michigan always trying to steal resources from Ohio. Just went from land to players. We'll see how it goes in the future. But yes, Jim Tressel definitely deserves to be on that for locking it down and getting 9-1 plus the national championship just to sprinkle it in there. So the fourth position, I think the fourth spot always the hardest spot when you're trying to come up with a Mount Rushmore and you go through it. 8 coaches from Ohio State are in the College Football Hall of Fame. Urban Meyer will eventually be the ninth when he gets inducted. Obviously, Earl Bruce taking over after Woody left in kind of that terrible fashion after hitting a Clemson player in the head
Hmm.
during the bowl
Yeah.
game, another Clemson rivalry. But I'm going to keep him off of this just because I feel like he was always going to be considered under Woody Hayes type of role.
Hmm.
I'd almost give his legacy more points to Woody Hayes than to himself. His record against Michigan, 5-4. If he was there as long as Woody was, he would have been 15-12. Woody Hayes was 16-11-1, practically the same. Earl Bruce, no national championships. So I'm going to leave him off for that reason. John Cooper, he has the second most Big Ten wins as an Ohio State coach, but he was 2-10 against Michigan, and he said that Michigan is just another game on the schedule, and you can't say that, and you can't take
Correct.
that game lightly. You can't play for the long term. You have to play for that game, and for that reason, he cannot be on Ohio State Mount Rushmore.
I
So that
figured.
leaves 2 left: Francis Schmidt and Paul Brown. Now, Francis Schmidt started the tradition of the golden pants. So 1934. He came in and said Michigan puts their pants on one leg at a time, got that great win against Michigan, and now all of the Ohio State players get golden pants for every win, just on a little kind of keychain. Bo Schembechler even had a couple of those when he was assistant coach for Woody Hayes, kept on to him because it's just such a long-standing tradition. We're pushing almost 100 years of that tradition at Ohio State. He was the first coach to have a winning record against Michigan as well, kind of helped spur on that rivalry. You need coaches
Sure.
that believe in the rivalry to help push this forward. You can't have people like John Cooper just saying it's another game on the schedule. You
Right.
need them to really feel the hatred between the two teams, and Francis was one of those first coaches to really drive that home. But as close and as much as I want to put him on the Mount Rushmore, I have to go with Paul Brown.
Okay.
First national championship. He is in the Ohio State Ring of Honor. He's a first national championship coach. He only was there for 3 years. Obviously, World War II started 1941, 42, 43 is his coaching tenure. But I think this rivalry is such a state of Ohio rivalry. And like you mentioned, when you get things named after you, it means you really had an impact. Paul Brown goes from Ohio State to go coach the Cleveland Browns, who named their franchise after him.
Sure.
He then leaves there to go to Cincinnati to start that franchise as a
Uh-huh.
football team. They named the stadium after him. So, for that reason, the impact, the way he liked to play, we talk a lot on the European football side of things with Pep Guardiola being the coach of Manchester City and his offense, his tiki-taka style, his possession-based football that he likes to play, and the way he's influenced the entire game over there, and the way that people play and the way that new coaches like to play. Paul Brown kind of did that back in the 40s in college and then took that to the NFL and making that more offensive type of style. And so for his impact on the game, his impact on the state of Ohio, I'm going to give the respect and put him on my Mount Rushmore. Any issues with any of those coaches?
No, not at all. I mean, the
No
fourth
problem.
one's always the toughest, like you
Yes.
said. I kind of guessed that
Yes.
the other three would be there. You guys have a much more, because Ohio State is the preeminent college football program in the state of Ohio. Okay.
Yes.
Michigan has another Big Ten school that many people from the state of Michigan attend, and also like weird pockets throughout the state, like in southwestern Michigan, they're Notre Dame fans because Notre Dame is really close.
Yeah.
And in the Upper
Yeah.
Peninsula, they might be Wisconsin fans because Wisconsin's very close. So you guys have
Yeah.
lockdown on the state for sure.
Yes, yeah, it definitely does help that Kentucky basketball state and the surrounding states. So you have to go all the way out to Penn State on the east
Right.
side, the
Right.
west side. Notre Dame would probably be the first one that really comes to mind out west from Ohio State, and then obviously Michigan. So yeah, it's nice to keep that little pocket for ourselves. But I want to go back to the 10-year war there, Woody Hayes and Bo. And I thought it was so interesting that the headlines when Bo was the coach, Bo who, that phrase almost rings with Bo Jackson in baseball, Bo knows and that kind of stuff. But Bo who, for one of the coaches that you put on your Mount Rushmore, as a Michigan fan, is he considered number one overall? The fandom. Can you explain a little bit of that?
So from a fandom standpoint, he probably is, but I'll get into that. Everybody said Bo Who because he was the coach at Miami of Ohio. And
Ah,
even Michigan at the time, you're not hiring MAC coaches typically,
yeah,
but they
true.
reached into Bo and he made the impact within the first year. Woody said that 1969 team was probably the best team he ever had. And they won
Yeah,
the Michigan, they won that game.
biggest
Michigan
upset.
beat
Yeah.
Ohio State, like one of the biggest upsets in college football history.
Oh,
What he did was, I mean, it's remarkable because when you look at the two coaches after him were Gary Mueller, who probably would have been on the Mount Rushmore if not for
oh,
a weird twist of fate. Okay. And then Lloyd Carr, his two most long term assistants. And then to a lesser extent, even Jim Harbaugh comes from that same kind of tree because
right,
he played
right,
under Bo for many
right.
years. And it's a very similar style to everything. Sure, the 1970s style is kind of the style that Michigan plays. Okay. Not so much Ohio State, but it's like run the ball, don't turn it over, play good defense. That's
Yeah.
Michigan's MO
It was
and
good
has
success
been.
last year, so
Yes, yes, and it has been for 40 plus years. But he also has all these sayings. He always said, it's about the team, the team, the team. It's going to be
yeah.
Michigan again. When he was athletic director, the famed story in the year that Michigan won the national title was is that just before the NCAA tournament, the coach Bill Frieder said, "Hey, I'm leaving for Arizona State, but I'm going to stay for the tournament." And he fired him on the spot and said, "Sorry, a Michigan man's going to coach Michigan." Enter Steve Fisher, who won the whole thing. So the
Wow.
famous sayings and things like that are really the iconic thing about Michigan
About
today
Michigan.
and since he's been
I
coach. So yeah,
He came up with that sign, right, in the locker room that says those who stay will be
of
champions.
course.
And I
Yep.
think,
Yep.
yeah, that
I
that
forgot
kind of
about that one.
goes to the big that's one of my favorites, and I feel like it kind of drives this whole argument between Michigan and Ohio State. I'll get to one of my favorite games, obviously the one I went to in 2016 with College Game Day a little bit later, but during then it came more evident that there is not only this proximity war, this historic kind of war, but I also feel like there's this kind of cultural war between Michigan, the Michigan man, the ones who stay in Michigan will be champions. This "Hail, Hail to the Victors," the theme song. That Michigan is this place of elegance, this place of upper echelon cultural standing, whereas Ohio State is not that. I know one of the quotes I always heard growing up is, "How do you get a Ohio State fan off your front porch? You thank
Pay
him
him for
for
the
the
pizza.
pizza."
Yeah.
Yeah, you pay him for the pizza. Exactly. And that's the way it looks. And I always felt like that was, you know, to make another soccer reference here, South American football, River Plate versus Boca Juniors, one of the biggest rivalries there a couple years ago. There was so much fan violence, they had to move the game from Argentina to Spain just to play the game because there was too much fan interference there. And the big reason for that rivalry is in Buenos Aires, they have this white collar, blue collar kind of combative feeling. And so the fans really hate each other, not only for the proximity, but also for that kind of cultural thing. So I love Bo for his quotes, like you mentioned, and for helping contribute to that status of indirectly really making Michigan feel like it is the place, this legacy, the status of it is second to none in the country.
Yeah.
So I really love that about Bo. And then obviously Woody Hayes. I would have loved to meet him just to hear him talk and scream and yell on the football field.
They
He would
apparently
have been.
remained friends like after Woody Hayes left
Yeah.
the program,
Wow.
which is surprising. They played all these games against each other, scheming against each other, which actually would kind of be fun to scheme against your friend, see if you could beat him.
Right? Yeah. That would be the best.
You know,
Especially for 10 years to go back and forth. The
right?
rivalry did finish in Bo's favor, I believe. One more win Michigan's
I
way
think
over
they
the
tied one.
Toledo.
I believe it was 5-4-1
Tied 1.
was the final
5.
record. So,
Yeah,
but that's
just
pretty
edged it
close.
out. Only closer than it's been over the last couple of years. So let's go ahead and dive into your favorite games. You're a season ticket holder, I believe, or you go
Yep.
to games every single year. What have been some of your favorite or most memorable games?
So I had to narrow it down with only getting to pick a few. And I'm
Yes.
like, all right, I have to pick one where I was alive and that I remembered. So as
Yeah,
cool as watching the video footage from 1969 is, I'm like, I can't really pick that game.
you
It's
can
like
do
one
it.
of the
Yeah.
greatest games. Second, I'm like, well, if I only can pick a few, I have to pick, I should pick ones where Michigan won. You know,
That gets harder.
2000,
That gets harder
it
of
does,
late.
because I
It
mean,
gets harder.
sometimes you're right. Yeah, you're right. But sometimes I remember the 2013 game that Michigan had no
Oh,
business being in was
no.
amazing, and I was actually
Oh,
there in
yeah.
person. The 2016 game, which I'm still upset about, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
almost 8 years later, it was unbelievable. Like as a casual football fan, if you're watching that, you're watching number two versus three, and they go to double overtime, and it's
Oh,
amazing.
my goodness. Yeah.
But so I had to pick the three that I remember, and I tried to pick ones that I was present at, but I couldn't leave out one in Columbus, and that was 1996 because
Oh,
for the second straight year, Ohio State came in undefeated and ranked number two under John Cooper, who you previously mentioned, and
yeah.
Michigan was unranked. And Ohio State's 11-0, flying high. They're going to the Rose Bowl no matter what. But this is their chance to win a national title. And Michigan, after falling behind 9-0 in the first half, completely flips the script, and they end up winning 13-9. I mean, that's like a 70s
Huge.
football score
Oh,
right there,
oh, yeah. Oh,
But
yeah.
you look at like the yardage, it's like, 200 plus yards for Ohio State in the first half
Woo,
versus 62 for Michigan in the first, and then the
woo,
exact opposite in the second half. So
woo.
I don't know what kind of halftime adjustments Lloyd
Flipped.
Carr made, but it was it was a gem to watch of a defensive football game.
Yeah,
So
and to be honest, I am a big fan of the defensive side of the football. I really like enjoying games that have those types of plays. You mentioned the biggest upset game, defense. Like you mentioned, I mean, all of those games really, defense was really the main thing there. Ohio State didn't score any points in the second half of that game.
right,
24-12, Michigan win. Love the defensive thing. So I'm glad you appreciated that
yeah,
1996 game and went
yeah.
with that one. All right.
I Another one I really loved was 1997 because
Oh,
both
okay.
teams were. I mean, Ohio State was ranked fourth. They had one
Yeah.
loss. You know, David Boston was their star receiver. I mean, just unbelievable. Like machismo walking into the game and everything like that. And Michigan jumps out to 20-0. Okay, there's snow on the ground. There's snow piles on the ground. It's freezing. Including off of a Woodson like returning a punt for a touchdown, and then he intercepts in the end zone. And like they barely hang on to win 20-14, but they still hang on. And you
Oh,
go to the Rose Bowl, win national title.
title.
A
Oh, yeah.
classic game because super close. Everything just you know
Absolutely. Yeah.
amazing. Again, 20-14 is still a good defensive score.
Oh, yeah. Especially over the last couple of games where everybody's putting
Right.
up 20 points a quarter almost, it feels like. Yeah, 1997. I was wondering if you're going to put that one in there just because of the national championship year.
I think it was an amazing game
Good
too.
feeling
You
and a
know,
good game. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
Exactly.
have one more. Okay.
One more.
I
Okay. Yeah.
wanted to put I wanted to put last year's game in because last year's
Yeah.
game was amazing. It was super
Yes.
close,
Another national
back and forth
championship
in the
year.
second half, but not even that. But the final
Yeah.
score was within a score. I mean, Kyle McCord had us Michigan fans shaking in our boots. Okay,
He had
he
us
did.
shaking in our boots most of the time he was playing, so that's good.
But no, I mean, for as a Michigan fan, okay, really, I go back to the
Yeah.
21 game, which was not
Ooh,
close. But in terms
no.
of an atmosphere, I mean, I'm literally sitting with, I still take it with my family and everything like that. We're all standing around before the game going, why do we come to this game? We get killed every year. I mean, and it had been a decade
Yeah.
since Michigan
Yeah.
had beaten Ohio State. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, they had to sit out the 2020 game, and they actually came out and won. And then on top of that, it started snowing at the end, and
Yeah.
it took me 3 hours to get home.
But
But it
but
was totally
yes,
worth it.
but a
That
great
so
drive. Yes.
from a
I,
recency bias and being there and stuff like that, that to me is
yeah.
still the probably the best game I've been to in person.
Yeah, that game, I can still remember that 2021 game just because of the snow coming down.
Uh huh.
And as the snow started falling more and more, I just felt like everything was slipping away more and more and more. Just
Yeah.
running the football against us over
And
and
running and running and
over.
running.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, it was terrible, 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 terrible to watch. On the flip side, I got to see Curtis Samuel run into the end zone.
Oh,
We were on that side. I guess even the name just brings it up. We
yep.
were actually on that side of the stadium. It's the only Michigan game I went to as a student, while currently a student at Ohio State. And double overtime, like you mentioned, it
Hmm.
it just doesn't get better than that. I think one of the cool things too between the rivalry Ohio State versus Michigan, Michigan Stadium, you walk into it, you're at the top. It's a bowl.
Correct.
It's the big house. It is gigantic, but it's one of those unique stadiums where you walk in, you're at the top. Whereas Ohio Stadium, the shoe is a wall. It's just straight up and down. And the benefit of the straight up and down is that when you have 110,000 people singing Sweet Caroline at the end of a double overtime victory, you really feel it. And it was just one of my favorite sporting games of all time. And mainly because I was there. So going to these games
I get
is
it.
just a whole nother
I get it.
experience.
Yep.
And
Like I
it's,
said, I'm still upset
it's
about it.
fantastic.
8 years later.
That's what's so great about these games. I'm still upset about 2021. I'm
Right.
upset that they didn't even play during COVID. I mean, why can't we just play that
Yeah.
game? I get it. Half the
Yeah.
teams were sick, but if we could have played. And those losses just hurt a little bit more when
For
they're to
sure.
Michigan, and they stick with you. The obviously, like you mentioned, it's hard to pick some of those games back in the day. 1950 Snow Bowl, 9-3.
Oh yeah.
Nobody got a first down.
Yep.
Michigan won because of a block punt.
Yep.
Practically gave them the ball on the 2 yard line. I think there was 40 odd punts in the game because you just couldn't see, so you just wanted to punt to get the ball away. You didn't want to risk it. So I will not pick any of those games. So the other game that I can pick is 2006, the game of the century. They call it the game of the century because obviously it is. The only time Ohio State versus Michigan played each other while both were ranked top two in the country. What do you remember from that game specifically, and what kind of memories does that bring up for you?
So that to me, I would say of all the losses, which there have been a lot of losses for Michigan in the last 20 years. I mean, Tressel and Urban really have done a awesome job. But the
Yeah.
that game, I mean, I know it came down to, I think it was 42-39 was the final
Yes.
score,
Yeah. Yep.
but it really was Michigan scoring a touchdown with a couple minutes left and then getting the 2-point conversion because it wasn't as close as you really thought it was.
Yeah.
But I mean, just the memories and the feelings, and again, Bo Schembechler dying a few days before, and
Right.
then the
Yeah.
other part of it is I remember being glued to the TV the next Saturday because Michigan fell from second, I think, to third, and Florida moved up to second,
Florida.
and
Yep.
Florida is losing the SEC title game. Urban Meyer's
To
Florida, by the way.
Arkansas. Yes.
They're
To
losing.
Arkansas.
I mean, I watched USC lose to UCLA the week after
Oh,
that. I was like, well, they're out of the
yes.
way, you
Beautiful.
know.
Yeah.
And then you're watching Florida lose to Arkansas, and I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, we're gonna have a rematch of the game,
Oh,
which would have been, I mean, insane. Like that would have
yeah.
been like,
We
hey,
were
you're gonna
robbed
play
of it.
again,
You can
you
say it.
know?
You can say it, David. We were
No,
robbed of
no,
it.
no.
Okay,
Oh, we were robbed of the
robbed
opportunity to watch it
of the opportunity. You have two
completely,
undefeated teams that play
completely.
to a
Yep,
42-39 game. Michigan doesn't play for 2 weeks. If you guys would
yep.
have just, why couldn't we get Wisconsin in here again? Just get Wisconsin in here, beat them by 45, and you guys would have been in
Right.
second place.
Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely
neither of us
robbed.
played because the Big Ten didn't have a championship game. They always ended
Right,
before Thanksgiving.
right.
Yeah, you're right. 2 weeks go by, and like memory kind of fades. From the
Yeah.
pollsters and everybody else. And of course, we didn't have a playoff. If there would have been a playoff, it would have been,
Oh
you know,
yes, yes. We
those,
would have been in for sure.
Michigan, Ohio State, Florida, and USC, and we got duds
Yeah,
of bowl games. For both teams.
yeah.
You
I
know,
know. I think
total duds.
do you feel like that kind of brings our prestige or the way we remember 2006 and that and calling it the game of the century because we both lost. I mean, Ohio State.
Doesn't
I
help.
remember. Uh, yeah, it doesn't. It can't help.
Doesn't help.
It can't help.
I mean, you're right, and that Ohio State game and the Michigan USC game were not particularly competitive. So you're right.
No,
Kind of the air does go out of the balloon, and you're like,
right.
oh, they were 1-2, but were they really 1-2? Like if they had both
Ah,
gone on to win, then it would have changed the perception for sure.
I'm gonna
You
blame
know,
it on the fact that Florida and USC got to play a couple extra games.
yeah,
They're more.
stale.
They
You
got
get
stale.
stale.
Yeah, we were stale. We were too stale. You
Yep,
know, I remember that game, so I couldn't watch the championship game against Florida. There, I could only catch the first 2 minutes. And what happens in the first 2 minutes? Ted Ginn 101-yard touchdown off the kickoff. So I'm like 7-0.
sure.
This is great.
Spotted
And
seven
then
points.
next day at school, everyone's laughing at me because that was the only touchdown Ohio State scored.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
So yeah, I agree.
But it was an amazing Michigan Ohio State game. I mean, I
Yes,
think
back and forth.
until the 2018 game, I think that was the most number of points scored in a Michigan
Oh,
Ohio State game. The
yes,
2018 game superseded that, like blew that out of the
80
water. But
points.
still,
Yeah,
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 that's a
yeah.
lot. That's a lot.
80 points. Yeah, especially back then in those. You had Beanie Wells, Mark Hart, two great running backs, obviously
Yep.
going at it, and so you knew that running the football should have been the way to go. And that game too, it had some of the best players in both of our histories. Obviously, Ohio State with Troy Smith, the last Heisman winner for Ohio State, and Beanie
You
Wells was
mentioned
there.
Ted
Laurinaitis
Ginn.
was there. Ted Ginn was there. Mario Manningham had himself
Yep.
a good day for Michigan. So you
Yep.
have
Chad
a
Henne was
lot
the
of
quarterback.
yeah. Chad Henne, had a
Lengthy
great
NFL
NFL
careers.
career, right?
So
And maybe would have been the fifth best player in that game, in the college game, in
exactly,
2006. And so,
exactly.
uh, who were some of your favorite players over the history of Michigan?
I mean, you mentioned some. I think Mario
Uh-huh.
Manningham was fantastic.
Oh,
Mike Hart
yeah,
was the starting running back for 4 years.
that's rare. So rare.
Going before him, you had Anthony Thomas. I think more recently, you have plenty to pick from. I mean, you have Aiden Hutchinson, who really didn't blossom until
Oh,
his last year. He got injured in the 2020 season, which is kind of forgettable for most Michigan fans anyway.
mhm.
JJ McCarthy. I mean, if you want to go further back, I can go back to uh, Tom Brady. Uh,
Yeah, I want to get to Tom Brady in a second.
yeah, Tom
Actually, now that
Brady.
you mentioned him, but I do want to talk about as Aiden Hutchinson's one of those rare players that not only plays for Michigan but now is a star in the NFL in the local team
Yeah.
in the Detroit Lions. So, as a Michigan fan, do you see him as even a step above because of the fact that he also plays, for the Detroit Lions as a superstar there, or does it not really matter?
I would say that growing up, even though I've lived most of my life here, I haven't always been a huge fan of the Lions just because I've more been into college football than professional. And also, they've been terrible
Yes, yes,
for,
yes. That is.
except for the
I
last
think.
like handful of 2-3 years.
Yeah.
So, but now that he's kind of like leading this renaissance of Lions football, and
Yeah.
it's, it is. I do think that people around here are more attached to him. He grew up very locally, like his parents live locally, like it's yes, it adds to the mythology, so to
Yeah.
speak.
I
you
mean,
know
as an Ohio State fan, and then my parents big Browns fan, so I can understand the sentiments. When the local team has been so bad for so long, I think that's also what pushes Ohio State fandom as well. Cincinnati hasn't been
right.
good since the '80s. The Browns haven't been good since Paul Brown in the '50s. So it pushes that. But I even admire, to be honest, Aiden Hutchinson and being able to make that transition to the NFL so well and play for the Lions. So, but let's move over to Tom Brady because for me, he started off as the seventh quarterback on the depth chart at Michigan, was able to make his way
Correct.
up, and then was playing like a split role. The greatest
Yeah,
quarterback of all time
not
was,
like overly celebrated when he was at Michigan. You know what I mean? Like, but
yeah.
if he started for 2 seasons, 98, 99. He was actually benched soon into the 98 season, I think in the second
Wow.
game, because as the defending national champs, they come out and of course they go 0-2. It's kind of maybe it's Michigan's thing as
To see, it's
defending national
yeah.
champs.
Just ride it off that and just coast through the
so
next season.
so he was substituted by, a true freshman in Drew Henson, who was a
Wow.
local prized recruit, because he didn't
Ah,
play that well. But then when you go back, it's like, when games used to be on ESPN Classic and things like that, I watched him in like the 2000s. He, engineers drives to beat Penn State on the road, to beat Ohio State at home. Like, you see glimmers there. And then, of
mhm.
course, he gets picked in the seventh round. And
Yeah,
so clearly good talent, but maybe underutilized at Michigan. I'm not sure
I
uh,
see.
what was there, or maybe he just took time to grow into himself. I'm not, but obviously, of course, now as Michigan fans, we all love him.
Yeah, see,
It's hard
that's
not
what
to.
I was
You win
kind of
7 Super Bowls.
right, and you get to claim him. Ohio State
Yeah,
fans been trying to claim Joe Burrow ever since he won the national title at LSU, and
that's right.
obviously he's
That's
going to be
right.
a good quarterback, but nothing like Tom Brady and his legacy. And I always wondered how his college career was that, and his NFL career was this. Like I feel like they're completely different, but he, I'm glad. That's why I'm curious about the Michigan fan perspective of Tom Brady because obviously he achieved so much in the NFL,
Yeah,
but how did he perform
yeah,
for the maize and blue?
yeah. I think it's
Uh,
all. Yeah, he was pretty good. He was
he
okay.
was pretty good. He was
Yeah,
okay.
and then afterwards, you're like, wow, he was amazing.
For me, let me think here. It's always tough for me to think of my favorite players over the last. I have I'm wearing a Terrell Pryor jersey. He was one of the first players that I really watched a lot of. Carlos Hyde is also one of my favorite players. Just back, that hard nosed running back style. Didn't really materialize for him. Zeke Elliott, one of my favorite players that I got to watch live
Of
at
course.
Ohio State with hurdling people and stuff like that. But I think one of my favorites in terms of lore and history, like Tom Brady is, this, obviously one of the, probably, I don't know, would you consider him the best? He has to be the best product of Michigan in terms of football, but do you consider him the best Michigan player of all time? Would he be close to that?
I no,
Or
I don't think so
you
because
don't
I
think so?
mean he has an immediate contemporary in Charles Woodson,
Woodson, right?
who
Okay, so would
was.
you put Charles Woodson as the number one?
I mean, it's hard to characterize Charles Woodson,
Yes,
I mean,
true.
versus somebody like Tom Brady, or not
Yeah.
Tom Brady, Tom Herman.
Oh.
I mean, he
Oh
he
yeah.
he played in the 40s, so
Yeah.
it's a totally different brand of football. I mean, Tom Herman scoring points, kicking field goals and
Yeah.
extra points. Like who? So it's very different. So in modern
Yeah.
football, I mean, probably, yeah. I would say Woodson in the
Woodson.
last, 40
Interesting. Yeah.
years is probably the best player. And he went on to have a very long and productive, you know, NFL career too.
Yeah, career. Yes. Yeah. Even the fumble, the tuck rule against Tom Brady as well. So you can even see it there. I love that. I saw a little clip of Tom Brady admitting that that was a fumble. So Charles Woodson won maybe the long term battle on that one. So
Probably.
the legacy-wise for Ohio State, your Charles Woodson, your Tom Herman, for example. For me, it has to be Archie Griffin. And I remember I went to a basketball game in North Carolina a couple of years ago, and sitting there, and I was with my brother-in-law, and next to us turned out to be a member of the national championship team for the North Carolina Tar Heels football back in the 60s, early 70s, whenever they won the national championship. And he told me about this game. They were playing Ohio State at the shoe, and they were just beating on them. He played defense, and they were so proud they knocked the number one running back out of the game. They knocked the number two running back out of the game for Ohio State. They went in winning at halftime, and true freshman Archie Griffin shows up in the second half and runs for 2 touchdowns and gets the win, the only win against that North Carolina team. And he's the only player with 2 Heismans. And the lore of him, I think, has to make him just the greatest Ohio State player of all time. And so I would have to put him at number 1. But I think some of the people I got to watch would be probably more of my favorites, like a Carlos Hyde or a Zeke Elliott. Maybe some of these wide receivers that we've been producing lately. But yeah, Archie was just something.
Yeah, different. I mean, when you look back at the history of the teams, Michigan's got 3 Heisman winners. That's pretty good. Ohio State has 6, technically 7.
Yeah, 7.
Okay, because he's the only person to win it twice.
Won it twice.
That's
huge, yeah.
And back in that day, also, it wasn't fully a quarterback award. It was given really to but that's a topic for another show.
Yes. Oh, I would love to have that debate, because there is so much of that, especially a year like this year, in college sports. Ken Travis Hunter, who plays both ways. Like where does Desmond Howard rank for you guys? I get to watch him on College Game Day pick against Ohio State every single week, but how does he fit for Michigan fans as kind of like, a Heisman winner, but was he as good as Charles Woodson? Or where does he fit for you guys?
No, Woodson was better.
Woodson was better.
I mean, Woodson played both ways. I mean, there's a reason, I mean, when you take, it's corners are kind of hard to characterize, because when a whole side of the field is gone, like a quarterback just doesn't even throw to them. Like, and Woodson still had all those interceptions. Maybe they were still throwing, but later in careers we see, like they don't even throw that way, because they're like, forget it. It's just going to get picked off.
If you're not involved, that's the biggest compliment. You just shut them down.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And that's how defense works. But, he played both ways, and Desmond is a great receiver. I mean, I think that season he caught 21 touchdowns. He didn't have the most prolific NFL career. He was in the right place at the right time. Got a Super Bowl MVP and a Super Bowl win with the Packers. Desmond is a great player. I mean, we all like him. Everybody likes him. But I think most Michigan fans would think that Charles
Woodson. Yeah.
I always those two matched up against each other in their heyday. I bet Woodson would shut down the pass.
That would be great, because they both could cover each other and run routes. That would we need to get that. We need to get that going. That would.
And Tom Brady can throw to him. Right?
Even better. Where's the Michigan PR team? Why didn't this happen in like 2004, 2005? With all in the NFL, this would have been great. You see college people going back on their bye week now. They get to go back to the stadium, get standing ovations and stuff like that. And they should have all went back one. Alumni weekend maybe. That would have been great. Everyone would have paid to see that. This year, obviously, Travis Hunter, maybe the closest to that Charles Woodson type or that Desmond Howard type out at Colorado. Sure. But this year, we got Ohio State pushing forward. No Heisman winners, most likely coming out of that team. And we got Michigan, defending national champs. So any thoughts on the upcoming game, the last one of the series here, or the latest edition of the series?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we had done this last year instead of this year. But it is what it is. I mean, I think that so I expect this year, I mean, Ohio State has the edge. They have more talent. Will Howard is better than any of the 3 QBs that Michigan has trotted out during the course of this year. Elite receivers. Egbuka's fantastic. Still have Travion Henderson. I think, and I actually even think that this year they might have an advantage in coaching.
Ooh,
You
yeah.
got a brand new
It has
coach.
to be. It
I
has to
mean,
be. A lot of
like,
Ohio State fans might disagree with you, but I would have to agree. You have to,
I
Ryan
mean,
Day has to get the edge here. Yeah.
if you watch some of the unfortunate Michigan games,
Yeah.
recently, there have been a few gaffes, and he's new. It's his first year, and
Yeah.
maybe he'll get it figured out. I don't think he's going to get it figured out in the next 2 weeks. Um,
Yeah.
again, but on the flip side, Michigan's defense is really good. You got
Yeah.
Mason Graham, you have Kenneth Grant. I don't know if Will Johnson's going to play. So I expect Michigan to keep it, closer than what the spread's going to be. I don't think it's going to be some huge blowout. I don't know. I would think something like 27-17
Yeah. I could.
sounds
I would,
fair.
obviously after three straight losses, I'd take a 1 point victory at this point.
Correct.
But I do kind of like what you said there about the defense because I would agree with that. I think this defense can still maybe do something. Indiana had been playing fantastic football, at least on the offensive side of the ball,
Yeah.
all
Yep.
season. I know everyone's complaining about not playing anybody, they're not playing anybody. Yeah, but they're beating them by 50. Like
Correct.
it's
Yep.
not it's
Yeah.
not an easy thing to do. These are still college kids. And Michigan was able to really keep that game close. A great, fumble there as well. So like, I mean, they had great plays throughout that whole game that kept it close. And I think that would be the recipe to get an upset in this game. And they have it. They have it. They could get the upset against Ohio State, and what an upset it would be. I mean, we're talking, I think it would rival that 1969 upset, just in terms of the fact that
Good.
everyone
Yep.
keeps talking about Ohio State and the millions of dollars that were spent on NIL. So now you have that whole money aspect that you didn't have in 1969 and what that would look like in the biggest upset. So I'm really looking forward to that game. So before we wrap up, I do want to give you the floor here and tell us. We went through some of the stuff here, but why is this, as a Michigan fan, the greatest sports rivalry in all of sports for you?
I mean, I think that this rivalry in particular, all the things that we mentioned, proximity, competition for rivals, all the characters we talked about, Day and Harbaugh and Woody and Bo and all the people that come into it is it rivalries are big when they're kind of like bigger than just the game itself. When it goes on to a whole year kind of thing. I know that Jim Harbaugh and I think Bo actually famously had a countdown clock, counting down the
Yes,
minutes and days until the Ohio State game. And then
yes,
even, when you leave the school, I mean, we're both decked out in our school's colors
yeah.
and it's we've both been gone from there for years. And, when it's a 24/7, 365 kind of thing. And I'm not part of the other big rivalries, Alabama, Auburn, Duke, North Carolina,
Oh,
Yankees, Red
I
Sox.
have to
Like,
wait. I have to kill this iron ball. I hate this. They even have their own version of the game of the century. It finished 9-6 on field goals. I'm all for defense, but that game was not great. Okay, I they have the 101-yard touchdown. Auburn's gonna win the football game. That the quote is in my brain.
I,
But
I'm just bringing up
Alabama has
other
owned that.
examples.
I
Lakers,
can't stand
Lakers,
it.
Celtics. Let's go
Okay,
with
that one's
that.
fine. That
Okay.
one's fine. I'll take that one. I uh Alabama, the disdain for Alabama is obviously huge for the Ohio State fans for many reasons because they kept beating us all the time. But I hate that rivalry being even compared. But anyway, I
Yeah.
digress. I saw.
But I think that again, it transcends time and just it's not one
Yes. Yeah.
day, and it stays with you for lifelong. Like it's one of those things. Like I have kids now. If one of them was like, "I want to go Ohio State," and I'm like, "Oh, I know it's a good school, but really, can't you go anywhere else?"
Where else, please? Yes.
you
Yeah.
know,
And yeah, it goes a lot of football players too. You have all those father son who both played. One played for Michigan, one tries to go to the other, and they just don't allow it. So, um, yeah, that is a big reason. I agree that it it's generational. This
right,
rivalry is generational, and it really is every year comes down to bragging rights on who won this
right,
game. Michigan not having a good season but it would be a good season on December 1st if on November 30th
Correct.
you won this
Yeah.
game. And
Yeah.
that's it. And Ohio State would feel exactly the opposite. A good season so far, obviously. Only one loss so far against Oregon. If we lose that game, it's a bad season. It's a
Right.
failure of a season.
Yep.
Ryan Day might not even make it to January if they lose this game,
I
and
was going to
that's how
ask.
big it
I was going
is.
to ask you if you thought he'd make
Yeah,
it to the post game press conference.
right.
I don't
They'd
even know if
fire
he'd
him.
make it
Fire
there
him, and
on
yeah,
the field.
the fans would fire him. The fans would fire him immediately. We've seen just the booze would rain down, and yeah, he
Now
would
it doesn't have, and unfortunately with conference realignment and
Hmm.
no divisions and stuff like that, it doesn't have the cachet that it did the last 3 years, where it was like winner take all. The playoff is bigger
Yes.
too. Last 3 years and 2 other years during Jim Harbaugh's tenure, I remember it was like winner take all. The winner goes to the title game. They're probably going to beat the West Division, so they probably also go to the playoff. It was like a college football quarterfinal almost,
Yes. The first
so
one.
it's not
Yeah.
the same stakes. And even if they're walking in the same records, but still, bragging rights, like you said, you get 365 days.
Of bliss. It's been 1,600 days for us Ohio State fans. So I hope
Oh,
you guys
our counter
enjoy.
was much longer than that. So,
Yes, and that's another thing too. I think that pushes this rivalry, over the edge. Not only like you mentioned the games, the stakes of these games, the national championship implications, especially back in the day when the season ended with this game, and then you were either in the national championship as a 1 or 2 seed or not. Uh, that like you mentioned Duke, North Carolina, separated by eight miles down Tobacco Road there. Their basketball games, their programs are historic, but the playoffs, really, the national championship was 64 team field. The regular season games meant well for the conference championship, but nothing
right,
really outside
right,
of that. Whereas this rivalry, it has those stakes. It had those stakes for
right.
so long. We were robbed in 2006 of the national championship game actually being between the two. So I do wish we would have gotten that. And so, do you think that this kind of diminishes the game at all? The fact that that has kind of gone away with the expanded playoff.
I would say yes and no. Yes, because you can lose this game and you can still go play in the Big Ten title game. You know, um, you could lose this game and go back and play Ohio State the next week. Like, but now with
Right.
it being divisionless, like, previously it's like both in the East Division, you can't make it. You can't both make it. And then you could also go to the playoff. I mean, a couple years ago in the 22 season, Michigan won the game. Ohio State made the playoff. It was a point away from beating Georgia
Yeah.
in the semifinal. I remember
Yes.
watching
Yeah.
that game going,
Crazy.
Ohio State cannot win the national title.
Yeah.
Like, that is not fair.
I
you
think,
know,
to be honest, I think the big reason why we were even as close in that game was the hatred to try and win. Like, oh yeah, we lost to Michigan, but yeah, we won the national championship.
yeah, and they
Give
would
us
have
the
played
extra five.
TCU that year, and I think
Yeah,
I can guess who might have won. But
yeah,
regardless,
but
it
yeah,
it might diminish it a little bit. But again, still, like you said, Duke, North Carolina, they could play each other 4 times a year. Yankees, Red Sox, they could play each other 12 times a year. Like,
yeah,
they're in the
with
same
their
division of the
yeah,
same. So we get to play each other once a year. Okay, you get
yeah,
twice. Okay, that's like a gift. That would be like a bonus gift
yes,
for all the Michigan and Ohio State fans out there to play twice in
and
the
it
same
would
season.
it would be for now a
Right,
semifinal or a final, so it would be the
right,
stakes would even up itself. Yeah.
right.
Um,
So yes and no to that question is the
To the
answer.
question. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, even you mentioned the Yankees Red Sox there. Some of those games are like the fifth, sixth man of the rotation as well. So you're not even getting your stars out there. Garrett Cole pitches probably 1 or 2 games against the Red Sox a year
Right.
as the number one pitcher for them. So, uh, yeah, well, thank you, David. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for going through this, the best rivalry in all of sports, and enjoy the football.